Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. But today we're going to talk about cybersecurity during the upcoming second term of President Trump. Now, obviously, today is January 2025. He was just inaugurated. And so I want to dive in. Now, earlier in 2025, in January, I did a video on what this is going to look like, but I want to talk about the nuts and bolts here. So if you heard or saw that previous one, this is an update to that because, quite frankly, you should be watching this as I've got a presentation here on essentially what we're going to be talking about, which is what Trump is inheriting and what the president may do in his basically his second term now. So with that, as always, we are going to start with the ground rules here. And so first things first, this video, this podcast is not political. I do not care what your political beliefs are. You may love or hate the new president. Doesn't matter to me. We need to talk about the boots on the ground, and that is cybersecurity, my day job. Now, first things first as well, this is only the facts that we know them as of right now. Monday, January 20th, day of inauguration, MLK, happy Martin Luther King Day as well, basically 4 p.m. Central Time or 5 p.m. Eastern Time as well, 2 p.m. for you people on the West Coast. And essentially all sources that I use here will be linked in YouTube and SoundCloud, all of that. And by virtue of that, there's quite a few of them, so make sure you're checking those out. And so with that, as I mentioned right in the preamble, let's start with what President Trump essentially inherits from the previous administration, because during President Biden's term that literally just ended at noon Eastern Time today, basically the following laws and executive orders were passed. And quite frankly, for cybersecurity, it was a busy 4 years. And I think most of cybersecurity community, again, I don't care about your politics, a lot of these push the ball forward for securing the country and private industry as well. And so I've been overarchingly a big fan in terms of cybersecurity policy. So first things first is the executive order from April of 2021, blocking property with respect to specified harmful foreign activities of the government of the Russian Federation. Remember, when Biden came in, it was in the wake, essentially, of the SolarWinds hit. And so by virtue of that, this executive order included provisions that essentially targeted cyber activities by Russia and Russian intelligence. And that, quite frankly, was something that was long overdue. I said that back then, and I've said it throughout his term, former President Biden's term, that we've needed cybersecurity enhancements under the first Trump term, under Obama, under W, et cetera, probably all the way back to Clinton, and we're finally starting to see traction, which quite frankly, I hope sticks around. On top of it, we had another executive order from May improving the nation's cybersecurity. And so this was a vast modernization of controls, basically focused on protecting the US government. We're talking zero trust implementations, endpoint detection response, encryption, enforcing multi-factor authentication. This was a major win for cybersecurity by far. Big fan of that. I don't care who the president is. This is pushing security to the next level, and that's something the federal government here in the United States desperately needs. On top of it, we had another executive order, June of 2021, protecting American sensitive data from foreign adversaries. Exactly what it sounds like, essentially making sure that software essentially was updated, properly protected, all of that, because it could prevent security or privacy risks if foreign intrusion were to happen. Again, SolarWinds got hit by Russian intelligence, and here we are. On top of it, we had the memorandum, the National Security Memorandum on improving cybersecurity and critical infrastructure control systems. Again, July of 2021. It was a busy year for cybersecurity, but this was great because those ICS, or industrial control systems, were essentially on the chopping block. I can't tell you how many times I've walked in to organizations to do assessments for whether it's CMMC for the military or ITAR for basically sensitive data for international trafficking, all that kind of stuff, and they don't have the proper controls around industrial control systems, or these control systems were installed when the Macarena was popular and they're still in use today. Very easy to hack. So big fan of that as well. Obviously, a lot to do. Now, with that, President Trump continues to inherit other things as well. Another executive order in October of 2022 and called Enhancing Safeguards for United States Signal Intelligence Activity. This one, interestingly enough, focused on data privacy and the civil liberties that issues that we had essentially with SIGINT, or signals intelligence. And this was, I think, a big win for us as people. We have a right to privacy under the US Constitution. And by virtue of that, this helps to reinforce that. So, big fan of that. On top of it, we had the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Again, I am not speaking to whether you love or hate this. I know this was all over the news, but I'm bringing this up because there were so specific provisions that included funding for federal, state, and local governments for cybersecurity modernization. This is something that we desperately need. Again, I am not debating the merits of the economic plan, but it had funding for cybersecurity, so naturally, I'm a big fan of that. On top of it, we have the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act as well. Again, not debating the merits of this, but this also had allocation for funding for critical infrastructure for critical sectors, energy, water, transport, et cetera, et cetera. These are essentially the lifeblood of the economy here in the United States as we're moving stuff back and forth. We need energy for everything, including our data centers. So essentially, having critical infrastructure hardened for cybersecurity controls, I'm a big fan of, as we all should be. On top of it, there was $1 billion that basically was granted for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to bolster their cybersecurity. Again, much needed. And also it called for the modernization of the electrical grid. That is a beyond critical thing here to the survivability of the United States during any kind of disaster or cyber attack. And so I'm a huge fan of that. We're stressing this electrical grid. I've done videos and podcasts on that. So big fan of that. On top of it, we had the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2022. Basically, that had cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure as an act as well. And so I think that's super important because if critical infrastructure is hit, think Colonial Pipeline. Again, that was end of Trump, beginning of Biden, Trump's first term, Biden's only term. So, these are things that quite frankly, we needed to be addressing for decades at this point, and we're finally seeing traction. On top of it, we had the Chips and Science Act. Again, not debating that. Obviously, the focus wasn't cybersecurity, but it did have provisions for research and development for cutting edge, basically, technologies that would have cybersecurity implications as well. So in other words, we could focus on these kinds of risks. And we're not done because there was a lot of movement in the last 4 years as well. On top of it, we had the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act in 2022. And essentially that was getting us ready for post-quantum cryptography. NIST has been all over that. They've been releasing guidelines on that. We have to make sure that we are hardening and maintaining good cryptographic standards. Otherwise, a foreign government with quantum computing, when it fully comes to fruition, can simply just walk right through our defenses. So super important as well. On top of it, we had the Federal Rotational Cyber Workforce Program of 2023. I was actually a really big fan of this because essentially it was cross-training. And so essentially you would have civilian personnel rotations for cybersecurity professionals across different agencies. And so essentially it's looking at hardening and increasing expertise in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is in desperate need of qualified individuals. And so of course, you're going to be a big fan of this if you like cybersecurity. Again, regardless of president, these are things that, I hope President Trump continues, obviously. Now, on top of it, we have the annual National Defense Authorization Acts. Every single year, the NDAA comes out for this. We'll have it for 2025 under the new Congress and 26, 27, 28, et cetera, et cetera. But it essentially has multiple cybersecurity related provisions. It funds U.S. Cyber Command. It funds CISA, which we'll talk about in a moment here, a whole bunch of other stuff. And so by virtue of that, these are the agencies and institutions that are helping protect us, helping ensure integrity is okay, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on top of it, we had the National Cybersecurity Strategy in 2023 and its implementation plan a couple months after it. And by virtue of this, this was essentially the Biden administration's approach to defending critical infrastructure, reshaping essentially the ecosystem of cybersecurity, looking at state-sponsored cyber threats and all of that. All of these are beyond critical things to the cybersecurity community. So big fan that came up. On top of it, we had the OMB memorandum on zero trust back in 2022. This was super important because adopting zero trust architecture was a buzzword for years. Forrester came out with it in 2011. We started implementing it fully in 2013, 2014, but it really started catching on around 2017, 2018. And so if you're looking at 4 or 5 years after that in 2022, for this really to become a memorandum, obviously this is a huge issue as well. And so with that, That's essentially all of the action that we saw in the last 4 years in the last presidential term. And now we have a new incoming presidential administration literally starting today. He's going through his celebrations and signing executive orders and all that. And obviously we have to talk then about what we know, not just the predictions that I had in my earlier video this month, but what we know about the new incoming president and his thoughts on cybersecurity. And so here's the thing. I went looking for this, and he really honestly hasn't said much about it himself. That doesn't mean it's not a priority for the new president, but he's not speaking about it as he is speaking about other hot button topics like immigration, the border, all of that, apparently the Gulf of America now, and some other stuff as well. And so with that, we kind of have to look at his surrogates and what his surrogates are saying about how they will help him potentially shape the new government and what cybersecurity is going to look like in there. And so with that, we're going to turn to two people. Now, the first one is what seems to be the incoming head of CISA. Now, this is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and it will soon be headed up, assuming she gets the votes. I believe she already has the votes or is soon to have the votes. But former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem essentially had a confirmation hearing on January 17 about, few days ago, and she stated a couple of different things there that give you a kind of perspective and understanding of where CISA is going to go. So the first thing she said, and I quote for all you listeners that are not watching this presentation, CISA's gotten far off mission. They're using their resources in ways that was never intended. The misinformation and disinformation that they have stubbed their toe into and meddled with should be refocused onto what their job is, and that is to support critical infrastructure, to have the resources and be prepared for those cyber attacks that they will face. End quote. And so with that, yes, I'm of dual minds of this, and we'll talk about my thoughts after this. But essentially, it kind of gives you an understanding of saying, hey, all of the work that CISA has done looking at misinformation and disinformation, which happens in cyberspace for the record, should not be their core mission. Their core mission should be purely the defense thereof of critical infrastructure. And here we are. Now, she also said in her confirmation hearing that, quote, CISA needs to be much more effective, smaller, more nimble to really fulfill their mission, which is to hunt and to help harden our nation's critical infrastructure, end quote. Now, that is obviously a reinforcement of what she said in her first statement that I just read about the core infrastructure. But the one thing that it catches my mind is smaller, meaning, is she interested in cutting the budget for CISA as opposed to expanding it? My thought on this would be hacking is everywhere. The United States is the number one target. We have a massive, unbelievably massive surface area for attack on all critical infrastructure that we've got. Think about water and wastewater. Think about electrical. Think about all of our core critical infrastructure we've seen hacked over and over and over, not to mention businesses getting hit left and right and businesses in support of the federal government that are supplying federal infrastructure like Colonial Pipeline, like SolarWinds on the technological side, et cetera, et cetera. And so to make the department smaller when hacking is expanding seems like the antithesis to me. But again, she's the incoming head of CISA, so we're going to see what that actually means. Now, on top of it, we have another surrogate of the president, and that would be Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Now, he is the panel's new chairman, and he said that he would seek to scale back CISA or remove it as an agency altogether. And that obviously is of deep concern to me because this is the group under the Department of Homeland Security, which former Governor Noem, excuse me, will be heading up. But to remove that which is defending the critical infrastructure, aside from the fact there's a dichotomy between what the senator is saying versus what Governor Noem is saying, soon to be head of DHS. And so I think this is going to give us a disparate look at potentially what could happen. Is this going to be some kind of fight in terms of budget and funding? We just talked about the NDAA that was in 22, 23, and 24. Will the 25 NDAA not have provisions or scale this back or seek to cut this? I don't know. But the point is that we have two different thoughts on this. And what that means is we don't necessarily know what Trump is going to do, the president is going to do regarding cybersecurity. And so let's talk about my thoughts and opinions. Those are the facts on the ground. I want to talk about what I think about this. And first things first, Obviously, you know my day job. If you're a longtime listener or follower of mine, it's all things cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not a fan of any kind of intrusion, whether it's our government, our personal lives, our corporations, all that kind of stuff. And by virtue of that, me and others that are public in cybersecurity talk and evangelize about how we need good cyber hygiene in our lives. That includes the government. Governments are the infrastructure that run societies. We all agree on a common set of framework, a common set of laws, and by virtue of that, the government is there to administer them. This is why we're not murdering each other in the streets, because we have laws that make it illegal, et cetera, et cetera. And by virtue of that, the government needs to defend itself, lest it be basically have its data corrupted or intruded on or secrets stolen. The last thing we need is the nuclear codes being given to somebody else because they can just hack in and take them. So this is beyond important. And so when I hear the dichotomy of we need to make CISA smaller or we need to kill it, depending on who you're looking at, that's of concern to me because, quite frankly, we need all of this. And the other side of this, too, is that I understand we're living through deeply divided times. And again, this isn't political. I understand there are going to be people that absolutely love and hate the president, whether it's former President Biden or it's new President Trump. But that's not the point, is that there's some things here that should transcend partisan politics. We all use technology. We all embrace technology. We can all have debates on what is considered misinformation, disinformation, what should or should not be censored or fact check on social media. The point here is that whatever we think about that, the system itself needs to be defended. And that is something that is so unbelievably important. And if we can't come together on that, that is a much greater issue, I think, in the long run, in terms of our technological stability, that which we use to communicate, to depress our kids with, whatever it is. On top of it, we do have disinformation. We have seen it just absolutely explode. And so obviously it is of deep concern to me that if we are losing those tools and refocusing one of the departments that right now is on the forefront of fighting this, that is of concern. Now maybe there's another department that can be formed, for the Department of Disinformation or fighting disinformation or whatever that is, but I'm not hearing that rhetoric. I go looking for these kinds of things as I keep up with the news every day. I do these videos and podcasts every day. I do a radio show bi-weekly, that's syndicated. So like this is something that is of deep concern to me because we have to be on the same page. And by virtue of that, we are seeing two separate realities being created here. This is not the first time I've mentioned that, in the sense that we have ecosystems where it's very hard for everybody to come together or even admit that you're wrong when you're wrong, right? And so that's a difficult thing because we have confirmation bias. We basically look at stuff that fits our ideology, our belief system, whatever it is. I love Biden, I love Trump, I love whatever, blah, 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 blah. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's based in fact or it's based in reality. And it's very hard when you have people that say, oh, the numbers are corrupt, when maybe they're not. And maybe they are. But this is what we're talking about. These are the things that we need to get on the common page for. And I'm not adjudicating one side or the other here. As I've mentioned over and over and over, again, I don't care about your politics, but these are deep concerns that we have in society. And if we are moving forward as a country, whatever that's going to look like, we need to be on the same page. On top of it, it's just something that is perpetual. And it's something that I think we're going to have a big issue with. And so with that, as always, we have to have patience. Essentially, what happens over time is most likely the truth is going to come out. It's going to sift to the top, whatever that is, good or bad. And I think it's important that we just take that time to understand. And in an age where we have information delivery in literally milliseconds, we need to take some time back to understand not all information is going to be accurate, even if it's in real time. We've seen the explosion of deep fakes in AI and video and pictures. I did that, with the hurricane that hit North Carolina, and there were so many deep fakes of like a little girl holding a puppy looking terrified. She didn't exist, but so many people fell for it. Just step back, breathe, and here we are. And with every administration, as I've done for decades now, I don't care who the president is, I don't care what the political party is, best of luck. Because quite frankly, you're the president for everybody. And so hopefully we'll see what happens the next 4 years, good, bad, or ugly, whatever it is. And again, I don't care what you believe, but just best of luck to the new administration. Best of luck to all of us. And here we are. And thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe. And please, please, please feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I'm obviously on YouTube and all of that. And as always, 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 please stay safe, stay online, stay private, and I really, really hope we all stay informed. Take care, all.